Tip Foster captained England's football team in 1902. Not just played for them, captained them. But that wasn't enough, so he also captained England at cricket. And even for that era when people played multiple sports, that is quite incredible. But that's not all. When he made his Test debut, his first time at the crease was with the score at 73 for 3. Essentially, the game could have gone either way, and he made 287 runs. It was the world record then, and for the next 27 years. It is still the highest score by someone on debut, and was also the biggest score for someone batting at number 5 until Don Bradman came along and decided to hit a triple century. Last month, Harry Brook became the 5th player to score a triple century when batting at number 5. That is all in the entire history of cricket, just 5 of them. Unlike the debate over the greatest batter of all time, there's no clear answer to who the best number 5 is. Is it Shivnarine Chandrapal with his unconventional batting stance? The grittiest of the gritty Steve Waugh? What about Andy Flower, who pretty much carried an entire team on his back? Or AB de Villiers, the man who would play every shot in the book, and quite a few that weren't? And of course, this isn't even an easy thing to answer, because when you look at batters and their numbers, they don't always actually bat in the same spot. Plus, the greatest batters usually come in higher than 5. So we've decided to only look at what players did when batting at number 5, because that is the last truly specialist batting position in a lineup. And so who is Test match cricket's greatest number 5? Thanks to MV Play, I was able to make this. Their advanced technology can help any cricket team elevate their skills and performance. No one in the history of Test cricket has spent a higher percentage of their career glued to the number 5 position than Misbah Ul-Haq. There was no point even calling him before 3 wickets had fallen. He wasn't answering that. Then just behind him on the list, you have Ajinkya Rahane and Andy Flower. Like they were both glued to that number as well. Travis Head and Tilan Samarawira also batted here for over 70% of their innings. But if you look closer, something else jumps out. This list is stacked with modern batters. It's not that players in the old days found it tough to bat at number 5. They just didn't stay there. Batting orders were a lot more fluid. In fact, if you look at England's batting orders around the 1950s and 1960s, they were completely random. Throw in wet wickets and suddenly you have players moving all around the card. Since those days, we've been held to ransom by the tyranny of the batting order. Players telling everyone that will listen that they are their batting number, like they're discussing their gender or ethnicity or something. In the old days, number 5 was more of a temporary position, and that was done on purpose. Your top order players went there as they were aging out, and a younger player would often start down the order just to get themselves a bit more acclimatized to Test cricket. Because of that, when you look at number 5s, you might be thinking a little bit more of T20 and one-day number 5s than you would be Test matches. So there isn't a lot of swashbuckling being done at number 5 in Test match cricket. There's a lot of sort of grit and grind players who kind of just found their way there because it either worked for them or they didn't want to go anywhere else. And also, the number 5 role is usually for the 3rd or 4th or even 5th best batter in the team. It's usually players who struggle more with the newer ball or aren't as consistent as others up the order. When it comes to just scoring runs, Chandrapal and Steve Waugh lead those charts very easily. Not far behind them is Michael Clarke. These are the 3 batters with over 5,000 runs in that position. Among the active players, Ajinkya Rahane, who I suppose is not completely active at the moment, but Angelo Matthews, Mushfiqur Rahim, Travis Head, Henry Nicholls, and also Joe Root have scored more than 2,000 runs in that position. And it is the Englishman who has the highest average of all number 5s in the history of Test cricket with 2,000 runs. But he, of course, is not in any way a number 5. He just spent some time there waiting to take over the number 4 spot from Ian Bell. But Clarke, Chandrapal and Waugh maintained that record over a much larger sample size. AB de Villiers is a few runs short of 4,000, but the South African great batted there more frequently than at any other position in his career, and he had a spectacular average over 60. In total, 13 batters in this criteria scored more than 50 runs per dismissal, with a couple of others just missing out. So how did the number 5 batters on this list compare to the other top 6 batters in matches that they played? Root averages a staggering 91% more than the players in his game. But remember, that is over the smaller sample size. De Villiers also has an outstanding match factor. He's only 70% better than the others. Flower, Clarke, Graham Thorpe, Chandrapal and Waugh all average 1.5 times more than other top order batters in their matches. Thorpe, who passed away recently, got a lot of love for his batting at the time, but he'd been largely forgotten about for a long period. Most of the players around him on this list are greats for their nation or all-timers, and he's not at their level. And a lot of the reason he doesn't have the reputation is because his average ended up being under 45. But England played on a lot of tricky surfaces, and he was certainly a fantastic player without a lot of help. But one place he did struggle was when he was batting in the first innings. As the match progressed, he got a lot better, averaging 66, 87, and 48. When you look at Henry Nicholls, who is almost identical in all 4 innings, like he's a robot. In fact, we actually had to double check the data after noticing this. And no one else on this list has a pattern anything like this. Alan Border averaged 84 in the first innings, which is second only to Root's 99. In the following 3 innings, he averages 41, 42, and 39, which is a very consistent record. Clive Lloyd, another famous Test captain, really struggled in the first and then was great in the next 3 innings. Waugh and Chandrapal are the people that we have seen do the number 5 position the most. They are both great in the first 2 innings, and then their averages actually start to fall. But Chandrapal's mark is similar in innings 3 and 4, while Waugh's dips completely away. By the 3rd innings, he's at 35, and then he's actually under 30 for the 4th innings. Angelo Matthews is the opposite, averaging 33 and 40 in the first 2, and then 56 and 45 in the second. Although both of them are from Southern Africa, wicketkeepers, and have been associated with RCB at times, there really aren't too many similarities between AB de Villiers and Andy Flower. Essentially, the Zimbabwean stopped bowlers from taking any wickets at his end. He would face over 114 balls per dismissal. When AB de Villiers batted, he stopped the ball mid-flight to make a decision about where he would score his next boundary. But they follow the same trajectory here. The only difference being that AB's average was consistently better across all innings. They start off well, then have a slight dip in the second innings, get insanely good in the third, and then a decline at the end. What about strike rates? Because we don't have all of Viv Richards' ball-by-ball data, but it's enough to know that he was really quick. His strike rate, even 32 years after his retirement, is still the highest on this chart. But please do not use the phrase Viv ball. It's also worth remembering that when he was at 5, he was well past his prime. But Head isn't too far off when it comes to striking, which shouldn't be a big surprise if you followed his career since the 2021 Ashes. On the opposite end is Colin Cowdrey, who is in his own tier, striking at less than 40. And honestly, it's not very often you see batters scoring a lot slower than Chandrapal and Flower. De Villiers and Clarke had high averages at a scoring rate which is quicker than most other batters on this chart. Zaheer Abbas' strike rate was just below 60, while Root and Lloyd were quicker than that. It is interesting that number 5 doesn't really produce as many outliers in terms of batting speed. Maybe because at 3 wickets down, the game is often already in a zone and the batters are just reacting to it. But at number 6 and 7, you get a lot of players with dual skills who score a lot quicker, and maybe some defensive all-rounders and keepers who are just trying to stay in. But at 5, when it comes to speed, Cowdrey, Viv, and Travis are the only major outliers here. We've looked at home and away, and of course for this, the UAE is considered home for Pakistan and away for everyone else. 7 batters on this chart average over 50 both home and away. De Villiers, Root, Inzamam, Thorpe, Chandrapal, and more. But there are definitely a few outliers here, especially the Australian batters. Border averages a lot more away. The fact that he went at more than 50 in Australia when on the road no matter where he batted is amazing for any batter, but particularly amongst the Aussies. Usually they are a bit more like Clarke, where he averaged 85 on home soil and only 45 on the road. And if you look at him batting outside number 5, his average actually drops to below 40 away from home. And that trend also holds up for Doug Walters and Head, who also struggled when touring. You'll see this pattern with Pakistani batters a lot. And here is Zaheer Abbas, going at almost 80 at home and low 30s when he's traveling. But of course, it's not just about where you make the runs, it is when in the game you make them. And that's why we look at median batting points. Take 2 players here, Andy Flower and Inzamam Ul Haq. When Flower came in with 3 wickets down, Zimbabwe barely had 60 runs on the board. Inzi was double that. And I know which job I would prefer. So you can see why the median entry point is such an important thing to look at. And from the data we have on Flower's overall career in all batting positions, his median entry point was 25.3 overs, implying that the top order batters in his team batted slowly, but also just couldn't make any runs. So at the very least, he wasn't always facing the new ball, which this number might have originally suggested. Mushfiqur, Root and Chandimal all batted when their team's runs were less than 80 a lot as well. And it probably made it the toughest for Root, because the new ball is still moving around quite a lot at that point in England. Waugh and Clarke's median entry point is about the same, while Chandrapal's is in the high 80s. The scoreboard read just above 100 at 3 wickets down when De Villiers would bat at number 5. And let's be honest, it is just much easier to bat at number 5 with a strong top order. So players like David Gower, Nathan Astle and Carl Hooper had their aggressive, aesthetically pleasing wings clipped by constantly having to come in way too early. On the other hand, being an Australian or an Indian number 5 in a great team looks like it's a lot of fun. Azharuddin, Border, Waugh, Clarke, Ganguly and VVS, that's a lot of guys getting a comfy ride to the crease. But Thorpe's record is interesting here. It shows that while his team didn't make a lot of runs, which is why he had such a high match factor, players like Atherton and Hussein actually made starts quite regularly, which meant that he didn't have to come in until the ball was a little bit older. But what about when there are a lot of wickets at the top? This is when Michael Clarke completely stands out. But that is not his reputation as a player. That is because before 2012, he would have been near Head and Gower on this chart. At that point, he was fine in that situation, but he certainly wasn't standing out in any way. But after 2012, he learned how to be the player that he probably always should have been. So he enters the wicket at 37 for 3 and he makes 329 not out. He enters at 40 for 3 and he makes 259. He enters at 55 for 3 and he makes 230. These are the best example of why it is great to be a batter at number 5, especially in a place like Australia, because the new ball is tough. And if you come on in at the end of that and you get set, the pitch just flattens out. You still have to be good enough to make that work. And for a few years, Clarke was next level at this. He also made another double century, coming in at 3 down for around 80 odd. But of course, the 3 standout innings we've just discussed were all at home. So Clarke definitely stands out on this list, but Flower and Waugh are also very impressive. And Chandrapal, like Flower, often did this without much, if any, support. De Villiers, Thorpe and Hooper are the other 3 batters with over 1,000 runs and an average of 50 doing this job. Chandrapal played 43 innings, so he faced this scenario more than any other batters and averaged 37. But of course, it's not just about where and when, it's also about who. Because great batters are remembered for their runs against high quality bowling. And Waugh stands out with 800 runs more than the next best. And that's of course because much of his best work came against a world-class bowling lineup from the West Indies. Chandrapal has the 2nd most runs and the 3rd best match factor here. Flower is an outlier on match factor and is one of the top run scorers against these lineups. But remember, he was so much better than the batters in his side, who against these great attacks would be absolutely annihilated. Walters, Clarke and Thorpe scored heavily and maintained impressive match factors against the best bowlers. Whereas this metric judges batters on how they perform in wins and losses, and so we don't look at draws. De Villiers' match factor in these games is ridiculous, but Waugh averages 75% more than his peers while being the highest run scorer on this list. And it makes sense that he has a huge amount of runs, as Australia didn't play in as many draws as other sides. As usual, Clarke, Chandrapal, Thorpe and Flower all have elite numbers, and the latter 3 all did it in a lot of losses. Chandrapal and Flower actually have 2 of the best averages ever in lost test matches. But perhaps the most interesting thing here is the players who are not great when you take out draws. Paul Collingwood makes sense, and I think Sourav Ganguly does too, though to be 17% worse than other batters in result matches is quite low. But VVS is a fun one, because in that incredible test in Kolkata when he made 59 and 281, he was batting at number 6 and then he was promoted to number 3. So he missed the number 5 position twice, which shows how hard it is to work out the truth of a worth of a player when you're only looking at them in that one position. And earlier we talked about how we don't usually see dashes in that position in the history of our game. But that does seem to be changing quite a bit at the moment. Think of Test cricket number 5s and you'll come up with Rishabh Pant, Harry Brook and Travis Head. In the future, will teams continue to field quick scoring number 5s as a tactical choice? Or is it just part of the game's natural progression that everyone is scoring quicker? It does look like a bit of a movement now. Teams now look at their number 3 as a potential 3rd opener. Their number 4 is usually their best bat, and their number 5 is the player who can do the most damage in the shortest period of time. So, with all that said, where do we end up on who is the greatest? I find number 5 such a weird position, because if you are a great number 5, like say Joe Root, why are you not coming in earlier? Which is exactly what Joe Root did. You also have others like Alan Border, Viv Richards, Inzamam ul Haq, who moved there as old fellas. All these are great number 5s, but none identify as that number. Then you have Chandrapal and Waugh conundrum. Both are great number 5s, precisely because they refuse to play higher up the order, even when needed. So their records look incredible, but their teams might have been in better positions in the matches had they taken up the harder and higher batting spots. That might have taken a couple of runs off their overall average, but allowed for younger or older players to bat in the easier number 5 position. And what of De Villiers and Flowers? 2 players who kept, and therefore were placed slightly lower down the order than their talent demanded. I mean, Flower basically played as an opener from the number 5 position, a middle order version of what BJ Watling did for that modern Kiwi team. But in de Villiers' case, it's actually hard to see how he could have been promoted higher up the order when they had two all-time greats batting at number 4 and 5. So is he a great number 5 just because jumping Amler and Callis was not in the cards for him? And at first I thought Michael Clarke's case was similar, being trapped behind Ricky Ponting. But actually, Clarke batted a lot at number 4, and he was rubbish there. So he was dropped back down to 5, where he ends up with the best raw numbers. And then it gets weirder because he made all of those runs at 5, and it starts to look like that is his ideal spot. But in truth, he finally unlocked the batting that was always within him, and he just happened to be at number 5 during that period. And even then, he still did most of his best work on what were very flat home wickets in about 4 epic innings. And none of this looks at someone like Clive Lloyd, who was the perfect number 5, but because of their order and his age and other factors, he moved around quite a bit. So you have someone that should be on any shortlist for the greatest number 5s who kind of has to be left off of this one. Graham Thorpe is in the conversation more just because when he batted 5, that's where he did all of his best work. And when you think about this position, you aren't really choosing the best batter, of course, because if they were an incredible player within their side, they probably would have batted higher. So you almost have to think, am I picking the best number 5 or am I picking the most prototypical number 5? And of course, that depends on really how you look at the game of cricket. Michael Clarke's short epic run might just be your jam. Shiv and Steve Waugh are really the most classical modern examples of almost what we think about when a number 5 pops into our head. But AB de Villiers might just be the most dramatic. So how do you really make a decision to pick the best number 5, knowing it is the least important specialist position? The player who comes in with a huge platform or to rebuild one of their own? I think in terms of batting, number 5 is almost the ultimate vibes pick. And for that alone, I'm going to go AB de Villiers. Because when you are 3 wickets down early, what you really want is someone who can stop any bowler at that point. And when the runs are flowing everywhere, I just want AB de Villiers to go out there and have some fun with it. And I'm not an expert on Tip Foster, but based on this hat, I think he would have wanted it this way as well. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.